My purpose as the discussant for these three presentations is to, as Linda Taylor said on Thursday, I think I got this right, put it all together and show us where to go. So I'm going to try to do that. But I'm going to try to put things together a little bit beyond the three presentations that you just heard, and attempt to connect it also to the work of the task force on quality assurance, which I think has been meeting concurrent with these presentations on quality assurance and quality management. It's an interesting thing. Okay, so let me find the thing I'm supposed to, there it is, all right. So some of you, I hope, have read, and maybe all of you have read, the report produced in June by our task force, and noted that the charge from John Reed is to propose some realistic actions that our organization can take and focus on promoting assessment literacy, ways of informing non-testing people who are seeking advice about what represents good quality language test or assessment procedure. And there may have been an S on that in the original. I apologize if I made that error. And if it's in the original, it's not an error, no matter what you think. Okay. So I'd like to comment on the fact that we're talking about quality assurance as a task force, and this presentation is on a concept called quality management. As Nick pointed out, quality management is an overarching concept, broader than quality assurance, that involves working with organizational systems and also working with the people within an organization, with the goal being continual improvement that comes from within the organization through a particular way of doing work. Okay. If you go back, or if one goes back to the task force, there's a reference to people, specifically non-testing people, who might be seeking advice, or who are seeking advice. And I think the question is, how might these people who are seeking advice enhance their assessment literacy, and who are they? From some of the previous presentations, I think you've heard about these people. It seems that from Jason Phan's presentation on Thursday, that some of those people or organizations might be testing boards, members of testing boards. April Ginther, excuse me for the typo there, discussed people involved in making admissions decisions. Meg Malone talked about various types of score users. You can ask her for the details. And Ofra and Barlori discussed novice teachers and also experienced teachers, all in the area of language. In the research that was done by Kathy and her team, just as a reminder, I would like to note that 81% of the 243 respondents, representing countries that operate, or countries from A to Z, I kind of liked that, have an English requirement. I don't know if you recall the specific numbers. I think that the finding was that 13% of them use some kind of commercially available language test or language tests, and that 33% use some kind of in-house assessment procedure. I think there are some questions, even if they are using a commercially available test, from the comments and the information of how are they using them. Okay. I noticed that you commented that several use the TOEIC and OPIs, and there was no information, although there certainly may be in the data that you have, about how those are used or how the decisions about the use of those commercially available tests are made. Frankly, I'm a little fearful about that. For those who are using in-house assessment procedures, I think it was clear from the data that Kathy shared with us that those in-house procedures may be somewhat underdefined. They may not be very well known across the different members of a particular organization. And aside from what the in-house procedure might actually be, there seems to be only a little information about how the outcomes of the in-house assessment procedures might actually be used. From the research that Mary Ann reported on, those 5 issues, I'm going to say that in Gene speak, when I was preparing this slide, it seemed to me that one of them that's a huge problem is understanding the complex nature of second language learning. So even if a pluralism is admired, how do people get to that point? May be very misunderstood. Understanding the process of developing context-specific tests and assessments seems to be a very important issue. Another is the domain-specific nature of users' needs. Fourth is interpreting the results of tests for making decisions about employees. It seems to me that that is the really critical concern in test use. And finally, understanding the findings of a workplace research. So I return to the issue of quality management. What does quality management, that perspective, offer us as an organization with a task? I think it offers a framework that is familiar to people who might be seeking assistance from us, seeking advice from us. Not only is it familiar, but it's respected, it's well understood. It makes sense to them, it works for them. It focuses efforts to continually improve systems, the organization's specific systems. And it supports and promotes leadership from within the organizations, rather than having authorities come from outside and tell people how to do things. The solutions are found from within. And finally, it's a framework that allows a specific link between practice and theory without an explicit focus on the theory. Another benefit of a quality management perspective is that it provides a mechanism for uniting the organization's own processes with our practices for professional testing practices, and allows the continual improvement of an individual organization's testing practices. I particularly like the idea of the quality management perspective allowing auditable practices in assessment and testing. Points of reference where one can refer to the testing practices and say, this is where we can improve it, this is where we must improve it. If resources become more constrained, how can you keep a system in place? Because it has pieces that one can review and improve, even when there's a financial crisis. So I wonder where the quality management perspective might take language assessment practices in the workplace. And that workplace might be a workplace where tests are created, or it might be a workplace where widgets are created, or where education is undertaken. In any workplace of those 243 that you mentioned. And I wonder where the quality management perspective might take our organization as we engage ourselves in the task that we have taken on. And I wonder where that perspective might take us as individual assessment professionals and our individual concerns, whether they are related to diversity in the workplace, access to resources in a workplace, or some of our other individual concerns. And I also wonder where the quality management perspective might take professionals in other fields who have testing responsibilities. Some of those people that Kathy mentioned, like, what can we do? How can we help them? How can we help them in their own systems? And I have asked 4 questions. I'm going to continue to wonder about those and ask some more questions from time to time. But I believe it may be time for you to ask questions as well. Okay.
Thanks for this great symposium about quality management. When I came to this year's LTRC, I noticed there's a new document published by Cambridge ESO about quality management. What I want to say is there are a number of documents in our field in language testing. So we have code of practices by ITA. Even within ITA, we have code of fair practices in 1993, and also we have these guidelines for good principles for good practices. And also we have, in North America, we have this ETS published standards for quality and fairness. So my first question is, I want to say there are a number of code of practices and standards in educational and language testing. So this document, what I want to say is, I want to ask Nick, what kind of unique contribution this new document will bring to our field? And my second question is, you talk about this convergence between the concepts of quality and validity, and also Anthony has this fairness framework, and he talked more about fairness. So I want to ask whether Nick could elaborate relationship between fairness and quality, validity. Thank you.
Is this mic live? I guess that's like a 2-hour lecture or a 5-hour one. This is a document, by the way, that she was referring to, which is called Principles of Good Practice, Quality Management and Validation in Language Assessment. And effectively, this is our manifesto as part of our own quality management system. So if you think back to what I said about the transformation of organizations needing to come from within rather than being imposed from outside, this is, in a sense, where we've got to over about a 25-year period since I first came across what was going on in Cambridge ESOL. When I first encountered the organization nearly 25 years ago, somebody had characterized our operation as a cottage industry. Not necessarily to be very flattering, I think. And I think what we've been attempting to do over the years is to create a transformation in order to provide effective assessment services to the kind of people who want to use them. So I wouldn't claim that this particular document has any more applicability than being something which explicitly sets out what we believe to be our position, our way of thinking on this area. But since I was involved in it, I can tell you one of the aims was to try and communicate this idea to the kind of to our stakeholders. The stakeholders being not just the people out there in the world who might be wanting to use our tests, but all of the people in our organization who need to understand these core ideas which are fundamental to our work. We have about 300 people in Cambridge, but not many of them are specialists in validity theory. They're the people who work in the entry process for exams, the results process, the dispatch process, the helpline, you name it. There are very many specialists. It's trying to get all of those people to work together which delivers a quality system. And so it's as much as anything, it's about communicating with the people we work with, whether on the inside or the outside, to try and enhance the quality in the way that I've been suggesting. Does that answer your first question? I think the other one is quite a difficult question to answer. I used deliberately the word validation. Okay? Now, validation is a process of accruing information to support the uses of tests in the test scores. And what I was trying to say is that if you're going to collect the right sort of information to back up the use of your scores, you need the systems in place to do it. And those systems need to be the kind of systems which you would implement in a quality management system. So it's not simply about defining the construct of the test. It's delivering that construct as a testing system, day in, day out, as long as you need to do it over the period of time in which those tests are used and the scores are being made use of. And that is what I see as a sort of two sides of the same coin. And if you get it right, I would argue that you would be better placed to be fair to people. That is, you wouldn't be creating tests which would have negative impact, would be unreliable, which would introduce irrelevant variants, and therefore lead to decisions which were poor. So, fundamental basis for fairness is that you're doing the testing right. That would be my argument.
That looks like Gary's hand, but somebody else is standing up to come to the microphone. Let's let the lady talk first, Gary, and then you can shout.
I thank you very much for a very interesting panel. I find this panel very interesting as well as the one on assessment literacy. And in my organization, which is a pretty broad-scale testing organization in the U.S. government, we have a lot of challenges communicating to people inside why we do testing the way we do and what the scores mean and what they don't mean. And we've made several efforts to try to communicate with managers, with test takers, with people that are asking us to do scores, these things. So I appreciate the guidance you've given of what you're doing at Cambridge particularly. And I've heard several discussions about this through the conference. And what I found in my experience in trying to communicate with people is that my first efforts to do so, I made it way too complex and technical, and that the message wasn't received very well. And so over the course of several presentations that I've made to different groups, I've simplified the message. And I've heard people suggest to me that we should be explaining to people what is reliability, what is validity. But I think that those words fall on deaf ears, and people don't think that depth of that message is maybe necessary for all the stakeholders. So, and the idea of developing testing theory courses or presentations for other stakeholders, I want to suggest that instead of testing theory, that maybe they need some testing appreciation courses. And I think that would take us much further if we kept it simple and useful to that particular audience, and so then they could trust what we're doing. Just give them enough to see, yes, we have quality management processes, and we have reasons why we're doing it in the methodology that we have, so that they can trust that and understand what it means and doesn't mean. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an interesting problem, isn't it? Because we wouldn't talk to our students in language that they can understand, but we would use language that business people can understand or company managers can understand because they're professionals in their own right. So I think we do have to learn to be a little bit more bicultural, a little bit more bilingual in terms of judging our audience and how we talk to them. Gary, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I'd like to ask you a relatively simple question. It seems, I mean, there's so much that's interesting here, but if you get out into the real world, these companies that have testing needs working in an international environment, it's very clear that they have a wide variety of needs, and there really aren't instruments out there that they could use. And you hear lots of complaints on L-Test-L that someone is misusing a certain test for a certain purpose. Well, the answer is there's no other test available. So there's all these needs out there, and yet we know that to develop fairly good instruments requires a lot of expertise, a lot of resources. And someone came to me, for example, the other day at a call center and said, well, we've got 9 languages, and can you make tests? And I said, sure. But we've 150 people a year taking these, and we don't really have much budget. And the answer is no, I can't. And how can we somehow, I mean, maybe this is a dilemma we can't solve, but this is my question to you. How can we somehow meet these very, very diverse needs when we don't have the instruments to do it, and we probably don't have the resources to make them either?
I think that's a question for you.
Let's see if I do have a microphone. I think part of the answer is helping people understand how to use thoughtfully and carefully what we have. I don't think that we can develop a test for every different context. And I'm not convinced that we need to. I think I could be hurt for this in this group. So please, like no mugging outside the door or anything. But maybe it's careful, responsible use of some existing tools based on data collection and analysis, rather than trying to create something that's novel for a particular, that's designed specifically and only for one setting. Another possibility is that we could identify groups of entities that have somewhat related needs and might be able to share resources. I think that's something that this organization could assist with. Hooking people up, developing sort of linked communities. I think I better stop.
I have another thought to add to what Jean said. At one point I was working for an organization as a consultant, and they had a 45-minute test which had some grammar items and some listening items and some reading items, and they were all multiple choice items. And I thought the 45-minute test was pretty short, but their reliability values and their ID statistics were okay. And the reason they came to me was that their clients, which were businesses, were going to them and saying, yes, we like your English language training, but the 45-minute placement test takes too long. We want you to have a 15-minute placement test. So my job was to shorten a test that was already almost too short in my mind. And so the question where we were finally able to communicate, arguments about validity don't carry much weight unless you really already buy the concept of validity, right? So where we were finally able to communicate was me saying to the organization, okay, look, what information is it absolutely essential for you to have? Of the information that your test elicits, which part of that information can you not live without? Can you not live without? Is that right?
Yeah.
A lot of negatives in that. Okay. And then what are the dangers here? What are the dangers if you make a mistake? And we can err either too leniently or too severely. What happens if we go back to the case that Mac was talking about, which I thought was just fascinating? This, okay, we have this guy and we want to promote him, but your test scores say we can't promote him, so how are you going to fix this kind of thing? It reminded me very much of what, who was it? Was it Carol yesterday or Jean? I guess it was when Jean was talking about the international teaching assistants, and different departments were ready to help out because they thought that the research was going to make the tests easier, the criteria for selection lower. And then when they found out, no, it wasn't going to get easier and it wasn't going to help them promote the TAs they wanted to promote, then they pull out of the study, right? So for me, a key question, and I think this is one that business persons and people in other kinds of organizations besides education can understand, is what's the danger of a mistake? If we admit somebody or promote somebody who shouldn't be promoted or admitted, that's one kind of mistake. Or if we prevent someone from being admitted or promoted who should be, that's another kind of mistake, the whole false positive, false negative issue. So that kind of language, if we can use the metaphors that other people are familiar with, I think sometimes it helps.
Can I comment as well? Oh, Dory's got a question.
Yeah, I just really appreciate this, and especially Nick, I just share with you a little bit of our experience, which was a very fast course from what we were talking about, applied linguistics. We were invited by a very small, what looked like a very small project several years ago to work on an English language test that has grown to become a consortium of 27 states, and will test over 1 million students next year. And one of the things that I really appreciated that consortium decided, it's very grassroots and all the states participate, was to have an annual quality control meeting at Cal that, now we just do test development and then we turn over the camera-ready copy to another vendor. And that was really great. It forced us to write all our processes and then document all the people, have their CVs, and just work on the project. I just wanted to share with you, I really appreciate the stress on the people and the process, because at the end of this year's review, which was like 2 months ago, they said, we want to see these bodies. We read about these people, we saw their CVs, bring them here, we want to meet them. And I think for next year, we'll start out actually probably with the people and who they are, because they realize that the two kind of go together. And in our project, this kind of reinstates the two. You can have all those processes down, but it's the people behind that who do that. But I just wanted to ask if you have any comment on, it's been really, really good for us to have this, because these are representatives from the states that are our clients who then go back and communicate their findings. And sometimes the findings are very much in our favor, because they say, we need to support and provide more staff at Cal to do all the work that we have to do. I know that a lot of the testing agencies do have external bodies to do this or that, but do you think that is something that body like Cambridge Diesel could have outside, I wouldn't call them auditors, but representatives of the stakeholders or the users come and really audit the process that you're talking about? So it's not just your manifesto saying we do this, but there's also the other side of proof to your public that
Yes, and thank you for that question, because in our case, being able to be audited against a set of stated standards is incredibly important for exactly that purpose, is to provide the basis of accountability to the stakeholders who want to know that it's not a stated fact without having some backup for with evidence. So we have two sorts of auditing that we do, and these are generalizable to other people. We are audited against ISO standards. So against, we define our core processes. We internally audit to the level we think is satisfactory. Then we get an auditor to come in from the ISO accredited organization to say whether we do what we say to a standard which is acceptable. And the outcomes of that are that it's okay, or that you have what they call a non-conformance, which means you're not doing what you say and it's not good enough. But actually, even if you do what you say well, they also identify what they call opportunities for improvement, or OFFIs. And the opportunities for improvement are a way of going back into your organization thinking, hey, well, somebody said it's okay, but they also said, why don't you go and think about doing it better still? And that's this idea of continual improvement. But that really focuses on, it doesn't say very much about whether the test is any good. It tests the construct that you want to test. We also have another process of auditing, which we've developed within the ALTE group, the Association of Language Testers in Europe, which is based on what we call a quality profile. And these are, for any examination, not the organisation as a whole, any test that we want to put forward for quality auditing, you have to produce a quality profile report based on 17 minimum parameters, which are derived from the ALTE Code of Practice and ALTE Principles, which are not dissimilar to ones which you would find in ILTA or IALTA or others. I'm not sure that it makes that much difference which of these codes you use, but the parameters are specified in such a way that you can audit tests for young children, tests for migration purposes, tests for any purpose, really, tests for the workplace. It's based on whether you do what you say you do. In this case, related to those 17 parameters which are to do with the validity of the test in a sort of more traditional sense. And I think that both of those models are applicable to all kinds of organizations, not just to Cambridge Research. The nice thing about the ISO model, for example, the ISO 9001-2008 standard, it can apply to a university department as well as it can to Cambridge or ETS, for example. So I think there are things that people could learn from looking at best practice in this area, in not just at Cambridge, but other organizations. A bit windy.
Is that Margaret? Great.
I think a lot of what you're talking about, I see is norm reference testing, and I can see some value across a sector. I think we also need to look at what the testing community can offer from a point of view of needs for specific purposes, criterion reference testing, and tying testing to specific training programs as well. And I think that the work that Dan Douglas has done in this area, specific purposes testing, is really important to keep an eye on. And I'm just thinking of it on a very micro level. You go into a hotel, and the hotel doesn't care about whether you're giving them total scores or whatever standardized test scores. They want to reduce the amount of complaints that the guests are having. So you've got to be able to talk to them in terms of what they want, the results that they want. And this is along the lines of what Marianne was also saying. And so how do you do that? And so in one case, we were proposing, Ann Harris and I were proposing every other floor in a hotel, where the housekeeper could get some training, and then we would look at the assessment would be the complaints over time, and there might be some other assessments that would be tied to specific training. But I think we don't have to go to norm reference in some situations. I think it's just want to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Margaret. There's a very interesting study that David Noonan and his colleague Gail Forey did in Hong Kong, where the Accountancy Professional Association came to them and wanted to know how much English do accountants or young accountants, junior accountants coming into the profession need. And so they were trying to figure out what's the metric that we use to figure out where the problems lie. And thinking about your every other floor, getting training, and then find out how many complaints come from the odd-numbered floors and even-numbered floors. I think that's brilliant. What Noonan and Forey did was to try to figure out, okay, what is it that we know the junior accountants with limited English are having difficulty with? And so they did a kind of a stakeholder interview process. And one of the things that came out in these accounting firms was that middle-level management was having to spend a lot of time revising reports and memos and so on written in English by the more junior employees. And so the metric that Noonan and Forey chose to use was they had the middle-level managers keep time logs of how much time they spent revising and rewriting reports written in English by their employees. Does the design make sense? And then what they were able to show in terms of return on investment was when an appropriate training program was offered to the junior employees, that amount of time required for revision and rewriting and correcting at the level of the middle and senior management decreased. So I think that we, not only do the tests need to be specific to the needs of the organization, but the ways of documenting the return on investment may vary from one function to another and from one sector to another. It's really a fascinating set of problems. I mean, if there were money in this, we could write grant proposals till the cows come home. It's just so many interesting problems to work on. That looks like Alana.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask a question a bit broader, in the sense that let's say we use testing. I really appreciate this quality control in various ways and the need analysis, and I think we learn so many new things in terms of identifying the real issues. I'm just asking, who does quality control on governments who, for example, introduce those what we call unfair tests, or whether in these different codes of practice, whether it's the Cambridge or the Hilltop, does anybody really follow this kind of research about what consequences, about what do these tests, good or bad, with literacy, without, do to people? So the question is, I know this is always mentioned in the code of practice, and I kind of refer to what the question of this lady was at the beginning. Sure, we've had so many documents of this sort. How do we really reach the policymakers who make those decisions, who we cannot really investigate their quality control behavior in using our tests? So I'd like to see how you can respond to this kind of need.
A little bit at a time, through sharing the knowledge that we have with people who are seeking advice, seeking assistance, helping them work. Yes, I'm an idealist. I think that by working within systems with those people who might be affected by a government decision or an agency decision above them, as those people understand more about sound testing practice and sound testing use, I think that they're given a voice. And I believe that that's what we need to do, is help interested people within companies and outside companies in life understand more about tests, demystify them, talk about them in language that's understandable to them, about issues that are really important, like, does this thing really measure what it's supposed to measure? It's really useful for what it's supposed to do? That's pretty easy to understand, and we can actually help people see that. And when they see it, I think that we can band together and act.
I have a view that you need to find a point where you can actually communicate with the people, which is not to alienate them straight away so they won't listen to you. So you have to find communication methods where you can get them to take notice of what you want to say without them just walking away. So I think you can begin to focus on things, not everything at once. I think picking up on what Jean said, on things which matter to them. So in the case of, for example, what the UK Border Agency. The UK Border Agency published a list of tests which was completely undifferentiated for any purpose whatsoever, simply because people sent in a list of their tests and said, our test is suitable for the purpose you've asked for. And they just published a list. And some people went to them, I think many people went to them and said, do you realize what you've done here? You have created probably the most unfair situation possible, because none of those tests, apart from about 5 or 6, have any documentation to demonstrate that they have any validity. And what we mean by this is that they don't have this, and this. And they say, oh, in that case, that doesn't sound very good, does it? Because it doesn't mean that people can pass this test without knowing any English yet. Potentially. Okay, what they did then was they eliminated a lot of the tests off the list and only put the ones which had some validity argument. Now that's only the first step. There's still a second step perhaps, because they are now advocating using some of those tests for purposes which may be questionable, such as for selecting people or keeping them out of the country if they want to come and marry somebody, the so-called spousal visas. And this is, subject to legal challenge. And many people, even before they did that, pointed out to them there may be problems here that you won't want to deal with for the following reasons. But they didn't take any notice because there's this big P for politics hanging over the top, and they weren't prepared to take any notice. But I think using some very simple dialogue on things which matter to them, which relates to what we might call validity questions, they were actually able to, I think, change the position, which was completely untenable, to one which may be untenable, but it was certainly a lot better than the one they had before.
Rebecca, I saw you standing there, but would you permit me to add just one comment to what Nick just said? I think, and maybe this is because I'm a publicity hound, but honestly, I think ILTA has a great opportunity here in terms of this project related to the discourse of air traffic control and how we assess air traffic controllers and communication with pilots and air-to-ground communication. This is a very sexy topic. I mean, at least half the world has been on an airplane, and the other half is going to get on an airplane, and you want to make sure that your pilot can communicate with ground control. And I really believe that as ILTA works more and more with this issue, we should get as much press as we possibly can out of it. Not just on our website. We have to get from, we're always talking in Turf about going beyond preaching to the choir. You and I can talk about validity and reliability and quality and agree and have a really great time and maybe not change the world. But if we could take this case, if we could take this opportunity to interact with people who are concerned about the quality of air traffic control and the safety in air travel, and help those people learn about the principles underpinning good assessment, but at the same time make sure that that interaction gets publicized. I mean, we need a 60-minute slot. You know, if we could get this issue on 60 Minutes, people all around the world would learn about language assessment principles as well as be more relieved travelers. So I think there's an extent to which we have to toot our own horn in a way that people in education don't often do. We need PR specialists as well as language testing specialists.
You're talking about the theory of action.
Yeah. Rebecca.
Okay, Kathy, that was absolutely the perfect segue to what I wanted to say. I think that, first of all, thank you all for this. This is really, I think that from the evidence you provided and probably from the experiences that just about everybody in this room has had, it's very clear that we have an issue with communicating the importance of assessment literacy with the lay people and the people who have the money and who are in charge of making the decisions to hire us professionals to come in and help them with these decisions. One of the things that I've gotten out of this seminar has been the importance of speaking their language. And I think that part of that is marketing ourselves. When there's something that is really important, we need to not only discuss it from within our organizations and with each other, which of course is important as well, but we really need to put that message out there. And I really think that, what you just said, I think that we really need to have more publicity and really need to make an effort to communicate what are some of the consequences of poor testing methods. And we really need to make a bigger name for ourselves so that people really know how important this issue is and that there are professionals who are available to help them make the best decisions for how to address this issue in their organizations.
Jean and I are grinning because that's one of our kids. Go. Sorry.
Really, I think this follows up on what Ilana was saying. This follows up on what Ilana was saying. I think is who do you get to? And I think in the government, you need to get to the people who write the RFPs. And those are the ones who make decisions on the types of proposals, the training and tests and so on that are developed. And I don't know how you identify them. That's just one thought. But I really appreciate everything that the presentation that you all put together. Thank you. No more questions? So that's a very good note to end. So thank you very much.
Thanks for staying with us.
Thank you, everybody.